that's a good thing for us to talk about. We were talking this week about recent legislation that is either formed or being considered, in which the federal government is mandating that several formerly independent corporations and industry groups are now going to be required to adhere to a national framework for security and infrastructure protection because, and this was due to the, what was the pipeline called?
Colonial.
Yeah, Colonial Pipeline. Because it shut down literally a quarter of the Northeast for a week, they pointed out that Colonial Pipeline specifically was not deemed to be a critical infrastructure. However, and by the way, this is something that they're finding as well, it wasn't the actual SCADA or secure controls that were compromised. It was the business side of Colonial Pipeline. So that's when the federal government decided that they had to step into the business practices of some of these supporting corporations or industries so that their business practices were literally incorporated as part of the critical infrastructure. So, and I mentioned this to you, Chris, before we went on the recording, so I'll repeat it. When that legislation was announced, hi, Kitty, when that legislation was announced this week, the former members of the President's Commission, commissioners as well as support staff, we've got this one great big monstrous email list. And admittedly, there are a number of people that have passed away, including the president of the commission, or whatever he's called, the director of the commission, retired 4-star General, oh gosh, I don't even remember. But anyway, General, whatever his name is, formerly from Air Force Systems Command. He was, and I'm going to remember it as we're going through here. But anyway, they basically caught this news and remarked among ourselves, you know, by the way, didn't we make this same recommendation like 25 years ago? And it, you know, went back and took a look, and yep, sure enough, this was part of the President's Commission on Critical Infrastructure Protection recommendations made in 1998 to the President. So anyway, there is, and I'm pulling up the President's Commission report, which I will send out to the group. This was the final report. By the way, the PCCIP, which is what it was called, PCCIP.GOV, which is now no longer there, but the PCCIP final report came in 2 parts. One was unclassified and one was classified secret. And the reason that there was the secret portion is that it actually identified certain vulnerabilities in certain critical infrastructures that it just, you know this, I know this, but for those listening, the reason something gets classified secret is that if that information is divulged, it can result in serious damage to the United States of America. In other words, it says something like, oh, well, the banking industry has this vulnerability, and it can be exploited in this fashion. Well, you don't want to say, you know, like if you're a boxer, you don't say, well, I've got a slow right hook, so you can hit me with a left jab. You know, you don't say that. You know, those sorts of things do get discovered, and they become actual vulnerabilities, and then you have to do countermeasures. But so there were a classified and an unclassified President's Commission report. This is from the unclassified, and all you have to do is go out on Google and look up PCCIP final report. And for example, I'm looking in the introduction, and I'm just reading the final remarks from the Section 1 introduction. And it says, of the three categories identified in the author's IA research framework, system-level security engineering is the most pressing overall need. However, information assurance R&D investment is impacted by more than a technical research agenda and levels of investment funding, government policy, commercial competition, customer demand, and the lack of qualified human resources, that's us, by the way, all have a significant impact on information assurance R&D investment. If the Commission is to have a significant and long-lasting effect on our nation's critical infrastructure protection through information assurance R&D, it must take into consideration all of these factors in its deliberations for recommended actions. You know, and this was put together by 22 commissioners that I had the greatest respect for. Let's see if I can find, yeah, I should be able to find them by name. No. Oh, there must have been a cover page to this that contained the commissioners' names. But they did show. Oh, here it is. Oh, I'm actually in there. No, I'm not. I'm not shown. So yeah, there was a cover letter that showed the commissioners and their agencies that they were with. Let me see if I can find that. PCCIP cover letter. Because, and like I said, there were people from all across the federal government as well as private industry. And I will give the example of the lady that we brought in, that volunteered from Pacific Gas and Electric. She literally took a 1/3 pay cut to come to work for the government because, no, I don't find it, but because when these commissioners were appointed and came to work for the President's Commission, they were paid federal paychecks. And the issue is that Mary, whatever her last name was, all I remember is her name is Mary. When she came, she was getting paid far more than the highest senior executive gets paid in the federal government, including the President of the United States and members of Congress. You know, working for Pacific Gas and Electric. She literally took a significant pay cut to come to work for this President's Commission. So anyway, and then there was a guy from National Association of Railroads, and he literally wrote the book on railroad infrastructure. Like I said, the guy Gary Kosciuszko helped to design and implement the GPS system, the global GPS system. So it was a very, very interesting amalgamation of private industry and public groups. Oh, this was a different paper. That's why. This is called Commercial Perspectives on Information Assurance Research. So this wasn't even the PCCIP final report. Who just joined us, by the way? Hey, David.
Hello.
How are you?
I am well. I'm getting there. Slowly but surely.
Okay. How you feeling?
Oh, I'm doing well.
Okay. Okay. PCCIP final report. There it is. Critical foundations. There we go. So let me read the commissioners, because I worked with these guys for 2 years. I was literally there before the commission was formed. I set up that floor of that space in Roslyn, Virginia, for a commission that was going to arrive. And they walked through the space and they said, yep, this will do just nicely. We'll take it. And they saw me standing there and they said, and we'll take him too. So that's how I ended up in the President's Commission for Critical Infrastructure Protection. I prepared their facility. And they said, we'll keep him. So let's see. Robert Marsh was his name. He was the General Marsh. John Powers from FEMA, Merritt Adams from AT&T, Richard Case from IBM, Mary Cullinan from Georgetown University, Pete Daly from Department of Treasury, John Davis from the NSA, Tom Falvey from Department of Transportation, Brent Green from DOD, Bill Harris from the Association of American Railroads, David Jones from Department of Energy, Bill Joyce from the CIA, David Keyes from FBI, Stephen Mitchell from the Department of Justice, Joe Morconis from NSA, Irv Pikus from Department of Commerce. He was actually from the FCC. Bill Rogers from the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, Susan Simons from the FBI, Fred Struble from the Federal Reserve Board, and here's Nancy Wong from Pacific Gas and Electric. And then there were all sorts of executive staff, there were professional staff, and then way down at the bottom it says support staff, Scott A. Ward. You know, and there were a bunch of other folks, but that's where I fit. I was support staff. I wasn't one of those people that would sit in a meeting and say, so, what are we going to do? But I was present, and I did participate with this group. And I think I remember telling you about the one where we had, I say we, the commission, brought in all of the leaders in the Department of Defense, the directors of each of the various what were called incident response teams, CERTs they were called, from Army, Navy, Air Force, I think it was Marine Corps. But we had 4 officers in their dress uniforms come and give a presentation, a classified presentation to the President's Commission on this is how our CERT operates. And by the way, those CERTs were at the time totally independent of one another. In other words, the Navy decided how they were going to handle computer incident response. Army decided how they were going to do it. Air Force decided. Why? Because the Navy had to do it in reference to ships and submarines, you know, and the Air Force had to do it in reference to satellites and ICBMs, and the Army had to do it in reference to field communication because they ran, you know, like Desert Storm, which started, by the way, right after the commission, was Desert Storm and Desert Shield, Desert Storm had just finished when the commission convened. So, you know, they were looking at things from their various perspectives. How does the Army, for example, handle computer incident response? How does the Navy handle computer incident response? And all 4 of these senior officers within their various military organizations showed up and went through their little slide presentation classified to, you know, these commissioners who sat in this SCIF, secure compartmented information facility, and listened to these classified briefings. And I have never felt more honored to be part of the President's Commission. This was a high point of my career, if you will, because what happened was these 4 officers came in and said, here's what we do. Blah, 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 slide, 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 slide behind them. And I was asked to sit in on this because I was a federal civilian working for the U.S. Air Force in the Pentagon. as part of the, what's it called? At the time it was the Air Force Pentagon Communications Agency, AFPCA. And I was literally doing IT support for the Secretary of Defense at the time and his front office. So these four guys came through and did their thing, and the President's Commission, the commissioner said, okay, thank you very much. You know, somebody will show you out, and off they went, and they literally closed the door of the skiff and turned back and said, okay, Scotty, how much of this was real and how much of this was junk? The commissioners appointed by President Clinton turned to me and said, were they talking truth or were they blowing smoke? So very high-level group, and they accepted inputs from everywhere. They literally had multiple what were called listening sessions where they traveled around the nation, and members of the commission with their, you know, technical staff would literally invite people to come speak to them. Just as if it were a, what are they called when, like Congress does their thing. Congress convenes a session on infrastructure assurance, or, I'm sorry, information assurance, or on, you know, legislation that's holding back the industry, or, you know, whatever. They would do that. Congress would do that frequently. Well, the President's Commission adopted that same approach and basically said, come tell us what we're doing right. Come tell us what we're doing wrong. Come tell us how the federal government can support you and bring your concerns to us. So they will get elevated to the level of a President's Commission who will then turn around and bring these things to the President of the United States. It was a very high-level commission, and they were very open to inputs from outside people. So there were lots of people that came in and said, you know, we really should do this. And I think it was well received. I do remember at one point the President's Commission actually asked for and received a meeting directly with the, at that time he was President of Security for Microsoft. I don't even remember his name. I'm sure he's in here. But the President of Security for Microsoft came and spoke to the President's Commission. And that's where I learned, and I've shared this with you guys before, that's where I learned about the massive reach that Microsoft possessed at the time. And by the way, this is the problem with major players in the industry. They think that certain things are recommendations and not essential because they are so large that they can't turn on a dime. They literally weigh the benefit versus the costs for certain things that you and I would say, well, it's obvious we must do this. And they say the cost is too high. They literally do that. I watched this occur. There were certain vulnerabilities in current Microsoft server operating systems that were brought to the attention of this guy at the time of these meetings. And, you know, this was literally DOD brought this up. And when they said, you know, we can't leave this in its current state because it is a known vulnerability within the Microsoft servers. And this guy from Microsoft said, we will take that under advisement. And in the President's Commission, they said, no, you don't understand us. We represent 2.2 million licenses that Microsoft is currently at risk of losing because other providers already do this. And so this is literally a reason why we should consider departing from the Microsoft Server operating systems and using Sun or using HP or using Compaq or using, whatever, Apple or whatever, rather than Microsoft servers. And this was prior to the year 2000 when Microsoft Server 2000 came out. By the way, we feel we had something to say about that. But anyway, Microsoft said, we'll take that under advisement. And we said, well, you're going to lose 2.2 million licenses. And this guy's response was the same. We'll take that under advisement. He did not say, we're going to fix ourselves. It was incredible. Because Microsoft was so large, they understood that, we'll get to it, but we're not going to get to it at the pace that you demand that we do. It was really interesting watching the dynamics because the industry basically said, who are you? You don't tell us what to do. We tell ourselves what to do. And he was absolutely right. That's the big challenge when it comes to public-private partnerships. The private side, they're literally under very little mandate to comply with federal regulations, except for what just occurred this week, where they said, we can't have another shutdown in petroleum delivery systems for a week within the United States of America like we did. Can't. And, it was very, very interesting that those dynamics occur from a business perspective. And this is why we, the cyber workforce and our leadership, have to be able to speak in reference to the business impact of what we need to have done. And the business impact if it's not done. Okay? Be thinking about that. In every case, you may have this real great cyber awareness. And you can say, well, if we do this, then, this will do this, and this will do this, and that'll be just disastrous. Well, when you're speaking to a CEO or a CFO, just disastrous doesn't mean anything to them. You literally have to put it into, how does this affect the bottom line? And there are multiple ways to do it. One is lost revenue. One is lost, what's it called? How people perceive you, your reputation, lost reputation. You could say, well, we've actually taken a look at this, and we anticipate that if we don't fix this real fast, it's going to get announced, and we may lose up to 30% of our clients to other more secure groups. It's a big deal. Why? Because these guys just got hammered. So, and, we're in the same boat. If we get hammered and don't fix ourselves right now, we could lose our business to these guys because they're ahead of us. And people know they're ahead of us. Those sorts of things. So that's how you have to speak when you're talking about expenditures, you're talking about resources, you're talking about whether something is a higher or lower priority. You have to always put it into business terms. Any discussion? I've spoken for 30 minutes. Any discussion on this, guys? Your viewpoints? Thoughts?
I find it very interesting that the plan from 25 years ago is being brought up today.
Yep.
I'm wondering with the different technologies if it needs to be revised and updated.
I think that the purpose of the commission was to point out how the way we have put ourselves together. In other words, if we were, let's say, Australian, a lot of people don't understand this, but much of Australia is semi-socialist. The federal government owns their communication infrastructure, for example. The federal government owns a lot of their transportation sector. So in certain countries, their federal approach means they can do things faster. Yes, it'll be more expensive and they'll have to raise taxes, but they can do things faster than in America, where we embrace private industry and capitalism, and therefore we have to convince these capitalists that it's important for them to do certain things. So I think that's what the President's Commission was more focused on. And you know, among other things, they said it's in none of our best interests if we lose our ability to have electronic banking. If electronic banking fails, we all lose out. And I think that was part of the conversation. The President's Commission was bringing it to the attention of private industry, and private industry was also saying, well, yeah, duh, you know, we're working on our part, but these guys over here aren't, and we realize that, you know, we're securing ourselves, but what about those people that support us? You know, so that's where the conversation occurred. The conversation wasn't necessarily in tools, it was in how we interrelate to form the critical infrastructures within the United States of America. And I don't think those critical infrastructures have changed. I think there has become a greater reliance on cloud and information assurance within them, but they've all basically embraced that. You know?
So it wasn't necessarily a technology conversation, it was more of a strategy conversation.
Right,
how to approach the problem.
And raising awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Raising awareness, yeah. So, for example, here's one. It says, the most significant projected vulnerabilities are those associated with the modernization of the national airspace system, which, by the way, I'm pretty sure at that time they were struggling to get funded. They said, significant projected vulnerability, the national airspace system, and the plan to adopt GPS as the sole basis for radio navigation in the U.S. by 2010, which is 13 years in the future, which, you know, is now almost, 11 years in the past for us. But they identified that and said, if we do this, this has to be resilient enough because everybody's going to depend on it. You guys, I think you know this. In the trucking sector, all fleet vehicles now carry GPS. UPS knows where all their trucks are at any time, 24/7. You know, how many of our trucks are sitting in this freight depot? And they can tell you. And what is their capacity? And they can tell you.
Scotty, I'll give you a great example. A few years ago, you would never know where your loved one was on a flight. Now you have flighttracker.com, and you just put in the flight information. You can know exactly where that plane is, its GPS coordinates, how fast it's going, how high it is up in the sky, and an ETA of when your loved one's going to land.
Right. Yep. I remember on some flights, and I don't remember what it was called, but used to have those things that were in the seat back in front of you. And you could push the right button, and it would show the little airplane flying across the nation. And you'd say, oh, I'm over Sioux City, Iowa right now, or whatever. So yeah, you're right. This is you flying across the nation, and it just unprecedented amounts of awareness. So yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm also approaching this because I saw the date on this by the year 2010. This was pre 9/11, right?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. Yep.
I'm gonna rethink my question. Maybe I'm wondering if they were thinking about that, like something could happen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm shying away from conspiracy stuff here. Is this more of a, hey, bad people can do bad stuff to us. That's what bad people do. Sorry for the very
you're right.
sentence there. But here's how we can secure us to prevent or at least slow down the bad people from doing bad stuff to us. Okay. I'm satisfied. Thank you.
And for me, this explains exactly why you have to have people thinking about, by the time 10 years from now,
right?
These are the things that we have to be concerned with. I mean, you have to be forward-thinking enough to say, everyone's going to need GPS, and these are the things that, someone messing with the GPS system could do to, this entire structure, like you said, Chris, aviation, and just the ramifications of it, and having to put something like that into business terms,
right?
So these big businesses can understand, loss of revenue, loss of reputation, it almost seems like you shouldn't have to,
right?
Color it in crayon so that they can lose money if they don't take care of this. I mean, and the way things work, generally it's something small, and they're thinking huge scale because that's what they do. I don't know. It just seems frustrating that you have to get all these experts together and say, hey, look, something bad could happen, and then you have the big business and all those folks saying, let's think about that for a while, and let's see how bad things get before we actually turn the corner and do the right thing.
Right. Right. There's another thing, and I will use GPS because I sat next to Gary, so that's why I remember a lot of these conversations. Gary was a consultant. He was literally the GPS guy, the federal GPS guy, and so I wasn't involved in the conversations, but I sat through meetings or supported him, or we would sit at lunch and chat or whatever. So that's how I learned a little bit about GPS. What a lot of people may not consider, and this was GPS for example, you notice they were saying GPS is scheduled to be the sole source of radio navigation for aircraft landing guidance systems by the year 2010. So basically what they were saying is the federal government as well as industry are about to put all of our eggs in one basket. The way we're headed, we're about to put everything into one basket, and have we made sure that that basket is going to not have vulnerabilities that jeopardize the whole thing? So sadly, a lot of people think economically, especially businesses, what's the bottom line? So how can I save money? Well, we can get rid of, we currently have 3 different ways to do this. Let's go down to 2. Okay, but you have to weigh the benefit. We will, cut the cost of this third thing, but then what is the risk of doing so? And frequently, when you're in an industry, you don't think outside the industry. And also, and this is one of the things that was pointed out in the President's Commission, people who were in one particular industry were so focused on that industry, nothing else mattered to them. I will tell you that, and this may or may not have been the final perception, but while we were there, the banking industry, I remember hearing conversations in the President's Commission where they said, the U.S. Department of the Treasury said, these guys are causing us to be at significant risk because they're basically saying, if we don't tell anybody what we do, then nobody will know how to compromise us. And that's a terrible way of trying to run your business long term. There's a phrase for that, and I don't even know if it's in our books or anything. It's called security by obscurity. If nobody knows how to mess us up, then nobody will learn how to mess us up, and then nobody will mess us up. Well, the federal government can do that through security classification. You know, they can say, well, wait a minute, this is classified secret. Because if they learn about this, it can affect the federal government. But private industry can't do that. So they stick to trade secrets, or they stick to, you know, whatever. Well, when you want to keep a trade secret, here's where we get into the fun and games of this whole thing. When you want to keep a trade secret, what do you do with your research and development? Come on, Chris, I hear you talking.
I was saying it's a great question because here's the other part. What defines a trade secret?
Mm-hmm.
Is it from the government? It's from the government's point of view? Is it from the company's point of view? Because those are two different point of views.
Very
of
true.
What a trade secret is.
Well, there's also what's called intellectual property.
Okay.
Okay. Intellectual property. How do you? Let's say I came up with this cool new thing. Cool new thing. Let's say I have this cool new thing. Oops. Sorry. When you shake this the wrong way. Yeah, it just did it. It turned on the camera. Anyway, you have this cool new thing, whatever it is, that I thought of. What do I try and do to make sure that I can reap the financial benefit of this cool new thing?
You got to copyright it.
You got to copyright it. So when you copyright it, what then happens?
You tell everybody exactly what it is and how it's used and all that stuff and why it's yours.
And you submit patent applications which are by nature public. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, the USPTO, does not deal in classified patents, at least to my understanding. So somebody comes in and says, ooh, I've got this cool new way of making roller bearings last longer. And this is going to revolutionize the auto industry as well as heavy business. Well, you file for a patent because it's your intellectual property because you thought of it. Well, okay, but then people learn about that because they can download your patent application. And they study it and they go, well, if you do this, then this could occur. And therefore, somebody who knows this could occur could actually jeopardize this system. You know, and I'm saying roller bearings, but it could just as well be a new authentication method for radio. You know, whatever. So, yeah, that's the problem with all of this. You're talking in terms of, I need to protect my business potential. So, always, my dad worked for General Dynamics for like 32 years. And whenever somebody came up with something big, something significant, something that was so unique, they can be considered the originators of it, they would wander off and file a patent claim for it in the name of General Dynamics. I worked for General Dynamics at the time I came up with this, therefore the patent is owned by General Dynamics. And in the federal government, a lot of people may not understand this. If you develop something while you're working as a federal government employee, guess what? The federal government owns that patent.
The other issue with intellectual property and copyrights, and I'm putting on my business owner hat here, it's only in the United States jurisdiction of those copyright laws and those intellectual properties. Right. It doesn't pertain in France. It doesn't pertain in China. Yep. This is the biggest enemy, making China the biggest enemy for us. They can knock off your product and sell it in China. As long as they don't sell it in the U.S., nothing we can do about it.
Right. Absolutely. And that is not only China, but Russia. Mm-hmm. China and Russia are both communist countries. They're not 100% communist, but they're heavy socialists. Let's just put it that way. And the idea of intellectual property is totally different there because the people own all of the ideas that the people come up with. You're absolutely right, Chris. So therefore, that's why the United States is being targeted by a lot of these state-sponsored APTs because China can make a lot of money off of the United States intellectual property that China does not acknowledge. So China pays for these bad actors to come in and infiltrate our infrastructures so that China can make money. It's like they're the idea of intellectual property. You know, I developed this. It's mine. No, it's not. It belongs to the people. And that's what socialism is all about. There is no intellectual property in socialism. You know, and communism. Communism, there's no true communism and there's no true democracy. Everything is kind of a gray area between the two. So when we talk about free trade, it's free trade with some limitations because the federal government says, well, you can't do this. Well, that means it's not free trade. But you're absolutely right. The national policies don't match. And a patent filed for in the United States does not necessarily mean that that intellectual property is a right in other countries. Absolutely true. So, you know, we have to be aware of that when people are filing for infrastructure protection or, you know, those sorts of things. What you do in one place and what you do in another place could be different. You know? You know? Here we go. We do something at the federal government level, acknowledge it as a best practice, and transfer that to private industry. Because remember, private industry in the United States is not required to do anything. The point of this, the President's Commission report, was to say, we, the federal government, it's our responsibility to point out the business need for a lot of these private industries to embrace what we're coming up with so that, you know, we don't end up 10, 20 years down the road. Well, in this case, it was 5 years down the road, 3 years, actually, 3 years after the President's Commission disbanded in 1998, we had 2001, 9/11. And, you know, what occurred was not an attack against critical infrastructures. It was literally using the commercial aviation industry, compromising it, and then using it as part of an attack against the United States as an entity. It wasn't critical infrastructure, although some critical infrastructures were heavily impacted because they were headquartered in the World Trade Center. There were some businesses that were absolutely obliterated and disappeared as a result of the 9/11 attacks. Some businesses, because 75% of the company, including all of the corporate leadership, were in those buildings when they were attacked and were killed. But yeah, the point of these things, and again, I will send this out to the folks. By the way, this is from I can literally show you this. This is from the Federation of American Scientists, FAST.org. And what they basically do, FAST takes all sorts of things and puts it out there and says, because we've been working on this, everybody has a right to know what we're working on. And of course, people who are concerned about critical infrastructures and vulnerabilities and those sorts of things are like, do you realize you're giving this out to the good guys and the bad guys? And the Federation of American Scientists says, we don't care. It is the right of the people to understand what we are working on. So you go out to FAS.org. That is not endorsed by any federal government agency because the scientists could be pointing out stuff, literally indicating stuff that's classified, and could cause, in here they could have something where they basically say, here are critical vulnerabilities. We found this out. And guess what? The good guys and the bad guys are going through these research-type websites. Look at this one. China is building a second nuclear missile silo field. China is building more nuclear weapons. Missiles. And guess who they're aimed at when they're implemented? That's right.
Another player in the game.
Yeah. Look at that. This is under construction. 800 square kilometers is in the early phase of construction. And this is what it's going to look like when it's done. These are all going to be underground missile silos, so they will be hardened against U.S. attack. Well, wait a minute. I thought the Cold War was over. Yep. But China is, regardless of what certain people may say, China, although it is our biggest trade partner, and by the way, the United States is China's biggest trade partner, it doesn't matter. China still has a national philosophy that is at odds with the United States. There was something out there, and I'm not even going to get into it, but I think there's something out there called China 2025, where China literally laid out a plan to overtake the United States as a world leader and therefore be able to dictate world policy on trade, on intellectual property, on, guess what? All the things that we hold dear, Well, if it's no longer such a big deal, let me give a great example. What about patents that were obtained for COVID research? Okay, I'm going to get a little political. The Democrats, why? Because they lean towards socialism. The Democrats have said, let's ignore patents and let everybody have this information for the good of humanity. Well, you know, that only goes so far, because the businesses who have invested billions of dollars expect to have some sort of return from those patents. They don't invest that money for no reason. So what's going to happen if we end up going semi-socialist, or, you know, God forbid, if we follow the Bernie Sanders route or the AOC route, and the government runs pretty much everything? Private industry is going to withdraw from a lot of their innovative research activities because it's no longer in their best interest to do so. The only way innovation will occur if the federal government funds it. And they're going to fund it through taxpayer dollars. You know, so we've got to be careful about that. There is a real advantage to allowing free trade and allowing people to think for themselves in reference to, if I can turn this idea into a business, I will make money. That is the incentive. And yet there are so many people that say, well, wait a minute, the rich are taking advantage of the poor. The rich are bringing innovation and ideas. They are saving lives. They are increasing the ability of American public to get goods and services. You know, they're not doing this as a sole act to build their fourth mansion, if you will. That's just part of the process that occurs. Go ahead, Chris. You were saying. Yeah, I saw your hand going up.
No. I'm just going like this because it's one way or the other way. The one way is the richer will get richer and they're going to have their mansions, their cars, and all that. Mm-hmm. The other way is the president of the United States is going to be the richest person and has corrupt leaders underneath him or her with their money as well. Right. So it's choose your poison to me. Right. To me, it's right. Choose your poison.
You have a point. Here's an interesting thing that a lot of people don't understand. Within the federal government, they have the civil service pay system. Mm-hmm. That system is determined by law. Yeah. Okay, it goes through Congress, and Congress approves how much you get paid as a GS whatever. Right. But what a lot of people don't realize is that because Congress has the ability to vote in all of these pay levels, Congress has, over time, by the way, they're civil service as well, but Congress has, over time, said, well, we're, you know, for whatever the reason, we're not the same as, you know, common laborers or whatever. We set national policy and we set laws for the federal government and, you know, blah, 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 blah. So Congress has voted themselves pay raises that nobody else gets. Congress has said there are certain, well, Obamacare. Let's use Obamacare. Has the federal government said Obamacare is mandatory for everybody, but then they exempted themselves. You know, you have to realize that with ultimate power comes the ability to corrupt. You know, you must do this, and I'll use this. You know, let's go back to one of the big hot spots. The ability to carry guns. You know, that's the whole, is this a Second Amendment discussion? Is this a, you know, whatever discussion? Dianne Feinstein, one of the most vocal opponents of what people know of as their rights under the Second Amendment, what a lot of people don't know is Dianne Feinstein has a concealed carry permit. Dianne Feinstein says that you shouldn't have the right to carry guns, but she has a right to. And she's enacting these laws. So you've got to be careful. If we give power to these people, that means we relinquish our own power to be able to make those decisions. Mm-hmm. So we got to be careful. And I'm not saying one way or the other, but I am saying that there are certain things you don't know about. You let Congress do all this stuff, and then Congress turns around and votes themselves pay raises. Why? Because they can. Nearly every member of Congress makes more than the President of the United States. And it's just a fact.
More importantly, they take in from their political contribution chest, too. So I'm one of those 20 people that says if you got a political contribution.
Yep.
I'm one of those 20 people. If you get go ahead, David.
So from a security perspective, let's encapsulate this and finish up. From a security perspective, you always have to be thinking in reference to the business of your particular industry or corporation, or you know, it could even be you're doing IT support for a children's organization, children's hospital, or whatever, a nonprofit. It doesn't matter. You have to speak in business terms, because the CEO and the CFO have to be able to understand what the CISO is trying to tell them. And they don't think in reference to bits and bytes and you know, locks on doors and you know, authentication systems and whatever. They think about the utility of these things. Mm-hmm. They don't think about the vulnerability of these things. So you have to be able to balance those two so that you can speak to these people in their own language, or they will not listen to you. They will not hear what you have to tell them. So anyway, I sent this out to our group, just some of our more recent webinars. If you talk to somebody about the CS-Sensei group, this is probably a good reference to use, because you can say, this is what we talk about. For example, this one is going to be PCCIP and national policy as well as intellectual property. That's what we spoke about. And how it relates to our job in cybersecurity. So, good stuff. Good stuff. Guys, do you have any final words before I stop recording? Okay.